Welcome to Artists in Residences, the Westport Library's virtual artist series. I'm Carol Erger-Fast, the exhibit curator at the library. In this episode, Miggs Burrows talks with painter Sherri Wolfgang. Sherri is best known for her figurative works, which draw on the painting traditions of the Renaissance and the Old Masters. Working in a variety of media, including charcoal, encante, and oils, she uses these historic techniques to tackle some very modern-day issues. She's created a series of paintings she calls statement paintings, and each one tackles a different, difficult theme. Sherri and I actually met back in the late 80s when she was an award-winning illustrator and I was an art director. We did a couple of jobs together, including a cover for Adweek magazine, which you'll see later, I guess. And although her style back then was totally different, she always maintained her roots in traditional art. So now let's join Sherri in her studio, and she'll give us a closer look at her latest series called American Pathos. In this one, she examines the doubt and the uncertainty of the millennial generation as they try to find their place in the world today.
Thank you, Carol. So my great pleasure. I've known, Sherri and I actually were, what are we called, we're alumni of Carnegie. I was an alumni of Carnegie Institute of Technology. She's Carnegie Mellon, same school, different names. So let's go to Sherri's studio here in Westport.
Hello. Hey, Miggs. Hey, Carol.
Hi. I guess maybe the first thing if you'd like to do is maybe just do a walk around, a quick walk around. Would that be doable? And then just to get a sense of what your environment is there.
Okay. Like Carol had mentioned, my studio started in the East Village of New York City over 35 years ago. And about 26 years ago, I moved to Westport. My dad lived here, and I spent a lot of time in my youth going to camp and enjoying Westport. And when it was time to leave the village, I think I moved out here in '92, and we built this studio out of an old barn. So at the time, it used to be a detached barn, and since then we've connected it to my home. It's about 600 square feet. I get a lot of light. And I've been drawing and painting here all these years. As Carol mentioned, I like to work on statement series. Whatever I'm interested in, it keeps my attention. I usually do a lot of research. I find my models, and I work on the series a minimum of like 2 to 4 years. American Pathos is probably going into its 3rd year. I have 1 more year of ideas and paintings, and then I'll be presenting a solo at my gallery in New York City, the Dacia Gallery. So come on in, and I have a couple of paintings that are up, that are finished, some are drying, and some are in process. So this painting is probably, I'm halfway through the series, by the way. A couple of paintings have sold. And these are newer paintings that are getting ready for, I guess you could say, part 2 of American Pathos. This is called All the Young Dudes Carry the News. The American Pathos series, I try to title all the paintings after pop songs. So this one's called All the Young Dudes Carry the News. This is almost done. It's drying. The series itself and a lot of my work is based on influences from the masters, in this case Rembrandt. I love Rembrandt. I am a huge student of Rembrandt, John Singer Sargent, Raphael, Titian, Michelangelo. In this case, it's called The Syndics by Rembrandt.
It was pretty good.
This painting probably taken me about 6 months. And I have a few more weeks to go. I'm still working out the tapestry on the bottom. But I work in oils, and it takes a while to dry. And then I also work with like resins and layers. So sometimes I periodically put the paintings up to dry before I can go back and revisit the work. So for example, down here, it's not quite done yet. And then in my oil painting, it always takes a good 4 to 6 months for the work to totally dry before I do a finished varnish, and then I send it off to market.
Well, can I ask, do you envision an entire series, or do you do one and then that prompts another one or inspires another one, or you think it needs a companion piece? Or I mean, do you have this the whole thing in your head? I've got 8 things to do to make this, to finish this series.
It's a good question. It usually starts off with kind of like a thought in the middle of the night. And I'm one of those artists that I can't remember, so I'll like quickly sketch it. And I have a place where I used to put like my thumbnails. So I develop it in sketch form. I have many ideas in my head, but then I use a photographer to work with me, or I use my own photographers, depending on how many models I have. In the American Pathos, I had all of these ideas kind of sketched out. I had them on my sketchboard, and I hired a photographer to work with me to photograph my vision because I had too many models going on. On the day of the shoots, I have my models come to my studio. I ask them to bring a certain set of clothes, and I go from there. But for each painting, the American Pathos series will probably end up being 12 to 13 paintings. But for each painting, there's probably 30, 40 shots that I take. I mean, I take thousands of shots until I get what I want. And it could be, sometimes I'll even Photoshop another figure in if I'm not getting, like I saw something in one photo that I didn't quite get, so I'll put the whole image together. And then I do work from a photo reference. I also work from the models themselves. A lot of the models were local. And I also work from a skeleton. So I sometimes will hang my skeleton up here. I hang it from the rafters, and I will suspend the skeleton to mimic the figure. Because photography is okay, but live model is the best. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'll use my own body, or I'll use my husband, or members of my family. But the best is actually to get the model into the studio. And if I can't, I work from reference, and I just make do.
So you're formally trained. I mean, you know anatomy, you studied anatomy, figure drawing, all that. I mean, so you know the human body from the inside out, literally from the bones out, right?
Right. When I was a student, figure drawing, figure painting at Carnegie Mellon was it. My anatomy classes were every day. Studios were 3 hours a day, morning and afternoon. But I had figure every single day, 5 days a week, all my 4 years. And it really truly was a science. So I did know at the time, every muscle, every bone. And it's like riding a bike. It all comes back. I can't tell you the muscles and the bones right now, but I know them just by the feel of it. I will say at one point I considered a medical illustration at the time. And I think it was just Johns Hopkins that offered it, but I didn't want to go to medical school for 3 years. So I went to New York and started my career then. And the figure's always been important, whether I was an illustrator and in the fine art.
Well, I thought just for a minute or two, I'd go to do the screen share of your website to show where, well, you were called a dynamic duo, but it's a dynamic contrast when this screen pops up of the kind of work that you kind of, made your bones, so to speak, doing in New York. And we'll come to the one that Carol, you did with Carol, or Carol assigned you, I guess. But this kind of a lot of were superhero kind of comic booky, great, it's amazing. I mean, it is a stereotype, but young girls, women aren't usually the ones obsessed with comic books. But were you, or is this just a career move?
This was sort of like a happy accident. When I graduated, I went to New York to be a painter, and I took an illustration class. I took a few illustration classes at Carnegie Mellon, and I really wanted to have sort of like a plan B for painting. because of that, I ended up in a production studio. I did a lot of comp and storyboard, and then the dynamic duo began, and we did a lot of illustration. So it was sort of like, it just kind of rolled along there. Painting, I did along the way, but it was second to earning a living as an illustrator.
Right. Well, here's the
And
one.
figure was super important.
This is the one that I guess Carol art directed. Is that right? This
Yes,
is the
that
ad
was
week.
called for Ad Week.
Yeah, that was back in the days when like cable was still in its infancy, which tells you how long ago it was.
Yeah, the three major networks there.
And that was all done before computer art. We did that, hand drawing, airbrush, but that, Carol, that was the cover that really got a lot of notice by my representatives, Gerald and Cullen Rapp. At the time, they were like top illustrating reps in the country, Cullen and then his son Gerald. And because of that cover, they picked us up and repped us for almost 25 years. So thank you, Carol.
You know, if there's some, maybe this is a stretch, but you know, a lot of your figures in this current work, which we'll see more of, all your figures are, well, first of all, they're larger than life, most of them, and they are epic and heroic. Is that a deliberate, did you want to kind of, you know, I don't know if it's idealize is the right word, but, you know, elevate the figure to heroic proportions?
Yes, the series, ever since I sort of ended my illustration career, keep in mind, as an illustrator, we did a lot of covers of magazines, which were 8.5 by 11, and if it was a double-page spread, it was 11 by 17. I really got tired of drawing and painting that small. So when I started to really paint for myself, all my narrative series were life-size. I felt like I felt the series needed to be life-size. I liked the feeling of the brush strokes and the drawing, and a lot of physical energy goes into a painting that's truly life-size. All the brush stroke, drawing, just everything. It takes a couple of weeks to actually draw it out, and then, you know, to plant all the lighting and then to paint. I can't even imagine these paintings being 18 by 24 or, you know, 24 by 36, which is more of the norm for gallery. I just kept getting bigger and bigger. So these are life size. It's been a pleasure to draw this big and paint this big. Fortunately, I have the studio, and fortunately, I have a gallery that has big enough walls. So.
Yeah, that's terrific. And do you want to mention, didn't our what do we call it? Alma mater, didn't they acquire one of your pieces?
Yeah, Carnegie Mellon this past winter did an acquisition of the Young Americans. That also was at the Westport Art Gallery, but they did an acquisition that took a year. It had to go through a series of okays. It had to go through a series of committees, and finally, after a year, they did an acquisition, and we shipped it out in January. So right now, it's being displayed. It was installed into their permanent art collection. In the middle of their student union. There was supposed to be an opening this past April, but because of the virus, it's going to be postponed until the fall. So yeah, the Young Americans is now part of the permanent art collection of Carnegie Mellon. This painting is called, by the way, Good Morning, Young Prince. Sorry.
So would you like to either, I can jump to the Young American series on your website to show more of those, or do you want to show more in your gallery?
Yeah. Show the series of the Young Americans, and then this is where we kind of pick up.
Okay, so that's the one that's in your studio now.
Correct. Yep, that's called
Good Morning,
Young Prince, and that's 48 by 72. That's called The Sunday Girls. I'll show you the original I have on the wall.
Okay.
It's 38 by 48. That's called
Let's Be Friends.
Let's Be Friends. that went into collection. That's called The Indigo Child. It's in the gallery in New York right now. It's being held there until the virus ends.
Is that your daughter?
Yes, that's Maya. The models are Maya and her friends. So the whole idea was to pick the early 20-year-olds, mid-20-year-olds, And I've been trying to work with them and sort of make a statement about how sort of privileged they are. Some are not, but they're extremely educated, extremely brilliant. And this one's called The Young Americans. That's the one that went to Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, great. Now, I'm just curious.
It's trying to feature, it's featuring just a mixture, diversity of their age. These kids are absolutely brilliant. Yet I find that they struggle in today's world. If you ask, to be honest, a lot of them didn't know how to write a check, things like that. Things that we take for granted that their generation just didn't really know about. But this one's called The Prom. And what I like about the early ones is that I really try, it's called The Promise. It's trying to go back in Renaissance times. I try to use tapestry, sort of the way Rembrandt would paint. He painted with a lot of dark colors and sepias and sanguines, and he did tapestry and he built it up with layers and layers. And this painting is huge. This painting is like 6 by 8 feet. What I also liked about it, again, that it was life-size, but painting that large really allows me to get the texture of the dress. I mean, painting big has its advantages. The disadvantage is finding wall space.
I'm just curious, are they willing models, or is it like, oh, Mom, really? Or are they?
No, they all wanted to be part of it. The American Pathos, I sent out my artist statement to all of them. And really, they came to my home one day. I did bribe them by feeding them.
Oh, okay.
And I think I paid their train fares. But a lot of them I've known their whole lives, which has been a pleasure because I've known a lot since they're toddlers. And I just try to, in my head, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with each model. For example, Good Morning Young Prince. Want to come back on me? Or is he back?
Yeah.
Good Morning Young Prince is based on John Singer Sargent, Dr. Pazzi. So this was, I'm a huge fan of John Singer Sargent. I have loved the painting Dr. Pazzi, which hangs at the Hammer Museum at the UCLA campus in LA. But I was just trying to get the robe. But Dr. Pazzi, back in the late 1800s, I'm trying to kind of do the contemporary Renaissance, the ripped jeans, the boots. I also try to put in a little bit of nature. After 3 years of painting this series, I was starting to miss animals, believe it or not. So I popped in some birds. Anyway, so I'm going to take you to the Sunday Girls. Okay, this one's called Sunday Girls. It has my daughter Maya, her friend Mel, and Rachel, and basically they're just sitting around on a Sunday morning reading the New York Times. They're talking about their job descriptions, they're worried about their futures. They're all in their early 20s and they're really just beginning their careers. I did take out the background and I put in flowers. I was trying to put in like a 1970s floral vinyl wallpaper. And I think it works pretty well. Just instead of having like the Americana kitchen, I was just trying to pick up a little bit of like a 70s wallpaper and 70s background and kind of mixing it in with like my kitchen of today. But you can see they're reading the New York Times. They are leaning into the camera. This shoot probably had 100 images. But what I liked about this one is that I like how Rachel is truly leaning into the camera. I did like Maya's hand, and I just love the positioning of Mel, the way she is. So, these paintings will probably be a little dated as we go forward because, we popped in the iPads. The way the kids dress today, that's, tattoos, things like that. So we'll see.
Yeah, and the lighting's obviously very important. Do you do that? Can help? You must direct the lighting with the photographer because there's
this
that.
One I shot on my own. The others we didn't really light. We just went. If I'm shooting, I just work with the light that I have. I try not to make it too much of a sterile environment by lighting the area. I really try to use natural light of the lighting that's given, and I try to make it like an organic feel, kind of like we're portraitizing the way they are at the moment, but there's nothing different. Like they truly were just sitting around reading the New York Times. There was nothing added, nothing removed. So I was trying to work like that.
Right. So you're not really glamorizing, and that isn't the point to idealize them at all. It's just to show them. So,
Yeah, just to portraitize where they are at age, I think they were like 23, 24 at the time. And years from now, you know, they're starting, this painting's like I think a year or two old. You know, now they've sort of moved on in their careers, and it's interesting just to capture it at the time.
did you want to, I don't want, if I think you had mentioned you might be doing something in progress that you could actually
Oh, yes.
show us
Okay.
applying paint to, and
Sure.
that's not too intrusive.
No, I'll discuss this one. This is also part of the American Pathos series. After this painting, I think I have 3 more, and I'm sort of concluding the series. Probably I'm going to wrap the series up in another year. But this is a painting in progress. This is called Chelsea Morning. You can see I've reused a lot of the models. This is Hannah. This is Colton. They're going to be, it's set in the backyard, trying to do a little morning light. I will say that I really enjoyed working with these models. They've all become friends in the process, those that didn't know each other. I like when they give me feedback. This painting I've enjoyed, especially because I just got done with a painting of 5 figures. When there's many, many figures, it takes a lot longer. So right now I'm very happy that there's just 2 figures. The process goes as this. I've switched from canvas to linen. I've also, over the past year, switched out my paints. I've gone from Winsor Newton up to these handmade paints called Vasari. I also use a little Holland paints. So the quality of the paint has gotten a lot better, and I'm finding myself really enjoying the painting process. I will consider myself more of a draftsman. I find that I sometimes feel more comfortable drawing than I do painting. So when I say that, it basically means that I really, really take the time to draw this out. I work with graphite first, I then go to charcoal, I use a little Conte. It takes me a good 2 weeks to block it out. Then I do an underpainting to block out the lighting, similar to Rembrandt. He does the sepia tones. His whole thing is about lighting, and then I start to paint from there. So, and I did, you know, set up a little paint here, if you want me to. So let's see. This part's actually very exciting. After spending, you know, 2 or 3 weeks blocking out the painting, the exciting part is actually putting the first color on the painting. So this is sacred territory, and I'm glad to share it.
Oh, thank you. This is great.
Okay, so I set out my palette earlier today. I use a bigger palette normally, but you know, this is just to set up. Maybe I'm going to start to paint the orange a little bit. But I use Vasari paints. I use Raphael and Rosemary brushes, and I use, let's see, I use a mixture of medium, poppy oil and just medium, and linseed, you know, whatever I'm feeling. And I can say this, I never really paint the same. I don't have a recipe. I just kind of like whatever feels right. So I'm not one of the painters that has a recipe. How to paint.
But the paints don't dry out overnight, so if you've mixed a good batch of flesh tones, they're going to still be there in the morning, I guess?
Yes. I have a palette that I will put the paint in overnight. It really won't go more than 2 or 3 days before they start to harden a little bit. But that's what a palette knife is for, to kind of break it up. So I'm just going to fool around a little bit. Just gonna put like a little base, like a, let's see. So as I mentioned, I worked some photo reference. Tomorrow, I'll probably grab a bunch of oranges and lay them out here. But for today, this is a little technique. What I like about the Basari versus a lot of the other brands is that you only need like very little medium, very little oil. The paint just goes right on and it's just beautiful. The other thing I like about the linen is that it can really push into the canvas. It has a little bit of a bounce back. I have my canvases made for me. I'll throw out Jay Simbach's name. He does all my stretching. Jay Simbach used to work at Max's. And I'm getting too old to stretch the canvases by myself, so Jay helps me. These are just the base colors. And everybody knows, pretty much everyone who's watching this would know that, of course, that in the shadows, there's always that lovely purple color or a Payne's gray, you know, or slate gray. It's just always nice to put that color in. Just trying to lay out the tones. And then, you know, you're always going back and forth. If you have any questions, let me know.
It's well, I was saying it was very hypnotic.
Towards the drawing stage, I'm always, you know, just putting a good, just to blend a little bit.
Well, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. We could either, while you're doing, we could jump back and I could show the series of The Dancer. What is that, Nickelodeon?
Sure. So that's Nickelodeon.
Yeah, just to, because they're just extraordinary. Talk about, you know, heroic. These are just amazing. Okay, look at these.
Okay, that's the beginning.
Sensational. And how many in the Nickelodeon series?
There was 13 in the Nick series. Interesting, Nick has been in all of my series. He's sort of like my constant muse. This one's my favorite. Go back to the other one. That to me is just the ultimate, you know, David. Mm-hmm. So that's the only one where he really has weight on both feet. All of the other figures, he's moving around, but this one to me is like the most classic of anatomy. And we called it Nickelodeon because it always reminded us of like an old, like Nickelodeon film where it was like shot, you know, with the lighting behind it. His name happened to be Nick, so it lent itself to the series.
Just extraordinary. Well,
and they weren't supposed to be typical dance moves. Oh, here's the history about that one specifically. These paintings were going to be used, the first 3 or 4 paintings, I was actually going to make them marionettes. This is a perfect example. I had strung up the skeleton and I was actually going to make them like broken body mannequins. And by the 3rd painting, I couldn't do it because I wanted to keep all the figures whole and beautiful. And I was just coming off of a series called Twisted. So I just thought, you know, between Twisted and the mannequins, I just wanted to, you know.
Well, thanks. Well, believe it or not, we're out of time because we just were hypnotized by your paintings and your technique. And so I can't believe it. So thank you. So we could go on and maybe we will do something else where follow up when the series is over. But thank you so much, Sherri.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Migs. Thank you, Carol.
And thanks, Randy.
I hope to see everybody in person soon. Everyone should stay well and be healthy.
Right. So Carol's going to just say official goodbye for all of us.
Wow, thanks, Sherri. That was really mesmerizing. I mean, to see that piece of fruit like come alive right before your eyes is really just incredible.
I can't wait to paint. I'm going to go back after this is shot. I'm going to go back and finish it. It's always fun to begin the painting.
An image to Migs, I'll pop it in. Anyway, just to close out, for all information about the library, including all of our online offerings, visit westportlibrary.org. And thanks, and hope to see you at the library soon.
Thank you both. Thanks for the opportunity.